Your sourdough starter is a living, breathing organism, and it needs food and water on a daily basis for it to be healthy and be ready to leaven some bread. If you wanted to slow things down, you could put it in the refrigerator, and then you'd only need to feed it every 7 to 10 days. If you wanted to shrink it down and minimize your discard that you produce if you're not making bread, micro method, both of those are linked in the description. But how do you manage your starter if you're baking bread every day? How does that work? What's the best way? So your sourdough starter is a living, breathing organism, right? And it's pretty common in the sourdough world for your starter, for a starter, to be fed a 1:1:1 ratio. So if you have 1 part starter, you'd feed it 1 part water and 1 part whatever kind of flour you're feeding it. What if you don't use it though? Well, then you're gonna have discard. And if you have discard, you could throw it away, and that feels kind of wasteful and elitist, or you can make some sort of sourdough discard something, crepes, pancakes, whatever. But if you're gonna make a discard recipe, I'd rather just make bread. So to minimize discard, you can actually just mix dough and make bread on a daily basis. And that's a great way to use your bread, your dough, your starter, these ingredients. But you don't always have time for that. And I understand that, people have a job and they've got work and kids and activities and stuff. But sometimes if you can string together like 5, 6, 7 days, you can accumulate a whole bunch of practice, especially if you're just getting started with this, and really start developing your skill of, managing your starter, mixing dough, stretching dough, shaping, scoring, baking, cooling, slicing. So let's just say I mixed up 2 batches of dough, and just bear with me here because it'll make sense, but I'll just kind of paint a picture of how baking bread on a daily basis fits in my life. And it's all adaptable. Everybody's different, and everybody has a different schedule and lifestyle. I work from home, so I can bake bread every day. So let's say that I've mixed a batch of dough in the morning, and I have 40 grams of starter left over. Don't worry, this will make sense in a bit. So I would leave those 40 grams in my mason jar, it's 32-ounce mason jar. This is what it'll look like. Leave it on the counter. I'll scrape down my jar, cover it loose, set it off to the side. I do nothing with it until about 8 or 9 o'clock. At that point, I'm gonna feed it. I'm gonna feed it a 1:2:2 ratio. I'm not gonna feed it a 1:1. If I feed my starter a 1:1:1 ratio, so if I have 50 grams of starter, I feed it 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour, that guy's gonna be ready to party and mix a batch of dough in about 8 hours. But if I go to, if I feed it at 9, what's 8 hours later? Way too early in the morning. If I feed it a 1:2:2 ratio, it's gonna take about 12 hours to become fully active and ready to be used. So, 10 to 12 hours is usually my window of time. So if I feed it at 9, it's gonna be ready between 7 and 9 the next morning. That's perfect for me because I like to mix dough at 7 a.m. Now, at 7 a.m., I mix a double batch. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about a recipe of dough real quick just to make things really clear. When I refer to a recipe of dough, like a batch, I speak purely in terms of flour weight. So if I make an 800 gram batch of dough, I'm referring just to my flour weight. Of course, if I add in, my 160 grams of starter and my 600 grams of water and 16 grams of salt, the dough weight is different than, my batch size. So just so we're all on the same page, when I say weight, I'm referring to purely the flour weight, and that's it. Of course, it would weigh more, but it wouldn't make any sense to try to refer to a batch of dough in its total weight because your starter can vary and your water can vary, their percentages. More on that in the Do It All Dough video. I'll talk a little bit more about, the recipes, bread recipes and the percentages that make them scalable. So at 8 or 9 p.m., I feed my starter a 1:2:2 ratio. I have 40 grams of starter in the jar. I mix in 80 grams of water, stir it thoroughly, combine it, so my starter is distributed into solution, and then I incorporate my flour. Mix, scrape down the sides, mark it with a rubber band, cover it loose with a lid, goes on a kitchen towel on the counter, and then 7 a.m. the next day, it looks like this, it's ready to party. How much total weight is in there? Well, I had 40 grams of starter, I fed it 80 water and 80 flour, there's 200 grams. If I'm making an 800 gram batch of dough, 75% hydration, this is pretty easy math. So 800 grams is my 100%. What is 75% of 800? 600. So that's my water weight. And I usually roll with 20% starter. So I have an 800 gram batch of dough, 20% of 800 is 160. So I need 160 grams of starter. I take out 160, mix it together, starter, water, flour, salt, stretch and folds, all that good stuff happens. But what's left in my jar? 40 grams. So that's how I end up with my 40 grams of starter. And what do I do with that starter? Well, it sits on, I scrape down the sides, I cover it loose, I put it on my towel, and that night I go again. I can keep doing that ad nauseum for infinity as long as I have flour and water to feed my starter and make bread, and ingredients to make dough. That's my lifespan, my life cycle of managing my starter with daily bread baking. And I could take you could roll with this for 4, 5, 6, 7 days until you're tired of it or your schedule just says no, you're too busy. And then you can go into the managing your starter every 7 to 10 days with refrigeration in the video that's in the description, and you can take a break. So this is a really cool way of not only making bread on a daily basis, but getting to know the behavior of your starter. The micro method is also great for understanding the behavior of your starter with a very, very small discard and without having to make bread on a daily basis. But in this situation where we're actually using our starter to manage its volume, you get to understand, like, I know that a 10 to 12 hour peaking time is what I can expect with a 1 to 2 to 2 ratio. And I know with a 1 to 1.5 to 1.5 ratio, like if I take 50 grams of starter and I feed it 75 and 75 at 9 o'clock, I know that's going to be ready sooner than if I had done, a 1 to 2 to 2. So that's kind of a really important thing. But also using your starter on a daily basis, it's going to be exposed to environment. The microbes, microorganisms that are just naturally in our air and our water and our flour. So it's going to become more robust. It's going to develop more flavor, and it's going to be more resilient. It's going to be more resistant to any contamination or any abuse that might happen along the way, because it does happen. So that's it. That's my cycle. It's easy to apply this to your own life in whatever way that suits you. My day starts early, so mixing dough at 7 a.m. is kind of perfect. Mixed dough, 30 to 45 minutes later, first stretch and fold. Another 30 to 45 minutes later, the second, and then third, and then the fourth. And within the first 2.5 hours of my day, my dough is mixed and it's into its phase of bulk fermentation. And then the afternoon, maybe 3, 4 o'clock, something like that, we shape dough, and then it goes in the fridge, cold proofs if we're doing, Banneton basket, and then you can bake them 8 to 48 hours later. Always make 2. My 800 gram batch I'm talking about is really 2 400 gram batches that fit perfect in like a 10-inch round or oval Banneton. Even if you don't need 2, you don't want to eat 2, make 2 because it's good practice. It'll really shorten your learning curve, and then you get to gift bread to your friends, your neighbors, your family, and you'll be the coolest person they know.